Casey Jones climbed in the cabin. Casey Jones, orders in his hand. Casey Jones leaning out the window, taking the trip to the promised land. Hi, I'm Maurice Tanning, and this is another episode of Acoustic Guitar's Campfire Songs, a series where we take a classic, familiar song and work out a simple single guitar arrangement suitable for a beginner to tackle or a more advanced player to use as a starting point to make it their own. Not to be confused with the popular song by the Grateful Dead, the Ballad of Casey Jones, also known as Casey Jones, the Brave Engineer, is one of the great traditional American folk songs. It tells the story of Casey's death at the controls of the train he was driving. The song has built him into something of a mythical figure like Pecos Bill or Paul Bunyan, but Casey Jones was a real person, a highly respected engineer with a reputation for always running on time. The tragic accident memorialized in the song really took place on the dark, foggy night of August 30th, 1900 on the wet tracks outside of Vaughan, Mississippi. Various versions of the song mention that people along his route knew it was him by the sound of the train, and that was due to the sound of the unique train whistle with the distinctive sound that he had. Casey was so punctual and the sound of his whistle so unique that people set their watches by it, it's said. The night of the famous wreck, Casey was on the second leg of a double shift with fireman Sim Webb. They had left Memphis aboard the powerful 10-wheeler Engine 382 known as Cannonball. Already 75 minutes late due to the train arriving at Memphis late for them to take over, they were still confident that they could make up the time en route by running hard. And they did. Approaching Vaughan at about 75 miles an hour, they had made up nearly all of the time and were now running only about 2 minutes behind schedule. Rounding a long curve coming toward the station, Webb spotted the lights of a caboose stopped on the track ahead. He warned Casey, who reversed the engine, slammed the air brakes on an emergency stop, and sounded the whistle to warn everyone within earshot. Jones managed to cut his speed from 75 to about 45 miles an hour, but there just wasn't enough track to stop. He told Sim to jump out about 300 feet before the impact. Jones managed to avert a potentially disastrous crash through his exceptional skill at slowing the engine and saving the lives of the passengers, but at the cost of his own. Soon after the accident, an engine wiper named Wallace Saunders created a song about Casey and the crash that he sang around the railroad yards to the tune of a popular song at the time called Jimmy Jones. Saunders never had his original version copyrighted, and as the song passed from person to person in the yards, it evolved as it grew in popularity up and down the Illinois Central line. In 1909, a pair of vaudeville performers, T. Lawrence Siebert and Eddie Newton, published it with the title Casey Jones, the Brave Engineer. These guys thought it was a comedy song, and for some reason I can't fathom, they added a final verse that was strenuously objected to by Casey's widow for making her appear to have been unfaithful to Casey, and that verse stuck in many of the versions over the years. Since then, there have been dozens of versions of the song, with any number of alterations to the lyric and form. The basic song is pretty simple, using just 4 chords, but many versions employ one device or another to keep its repetitive form moving. Some use increasing tempo, and others use modulations in key. I'm going to start out in G and use just one modulation up to A, and that will allow me to keep us all in the friendly realm of open, simple cowboy chording. We'll just hold the tempo at a moderate pace for ease of singing. This is a rather wordy song. Of course, as always with this series, my expectation is that you will view this version as a starting point and do what feels interesting for yourself. If you're comfortable with bar chords, you could modulate every verse. If you're a fan of tongue twisters, you could gradually crank up the tempo like a runaway train down a mountainside the way Johnny Cash did it. Or do a deep dive and find one of the educated guesses regarding Wallace Saunders' original lyric. Try it as a recitation. Make up your own lyric. The point is just to have fun with it. So the chords I'm using are a G, an A7, a D, and a C. And And then when it modulates, I use a straight A, a B7, an E, and a D. All right, so let's play the song. Casey Jones. Come all you rounders if you want to hear the story of a brave engineer. Casey Jones was the rounder's name. On a big 10-wheeler he rode to fame. Caller called Casey about 4:30. He kissed his wife at the station door. He climbed in the cabin with his orders in his hand. Said, "This is the trip to the promised land." Casey Jones climbed in the cabin. Casey Jones, orders in his hand. Casey Jones leaning out the window, taking the trip to the promised land. Through South Memphis, yards on the fly. Rain been a-falling and the water was high. Everybody knew by the engine's moan that the man at the throttle was Casey Jones. Jones said, "Fireman, don't you fret." Sim Webb said, "I ain't giving up yet. We're way behind with the southbound mail, but we'll be on time or we're leaving the rails." Casey Jones heading out of Memphis. Casey Jones with the southbound mail. Casey Jones way behind schedule, but we'll be on time or we're leaving the rails. Here's that modulation. Dead on the rail was a passenger train. Blood was a-boiling in Casey's brain. Sim said, "Casey, look out ahead. We better jump or we'll all be dead." With a hand on the whistle and a hand on the brake, North Mississippi was wide awake. He turned to Sim and said, "You better jump, 'cause there's 2 locomotives and they're bound to bump." Casey Jones, 2 locomotives. Casey Jones, and they're going to bump. Casey Jones, there's 2 locomotives. 2 locomotives, Sim, you better jump. Headaches and heartaches and all kinds of pain are all a part of the railroad train. Sweat and toil, the good and the grand, a part of the life of a railroad man. Casey Jones climbed in the cabin. Casey Jones, orders in his hand. Casey Jones leaning out the window, taking the trip to the promised land.